All right, so on with our program. Our speaker this morning is Peter Vessenes, who is the founder of the American Citizens for Economic Freedom. And I'm really excited to have him here speaking with us. I went to Colorado, must have been a month ago, I guess, Peter. Went to Colorado at the Heritage Foundation had asked me to go out there to their leadership meeting and to meet some people. And one of the groups I met was ACEF. And they said, geez, you're from Ohio, that's an important state, we're a new foundation. We're a new group that's forming as a conservative group that's trying to help groups around the country like yours. What can we do to help you? And we had a lot of heart-to-heart talks. We talked about Ohio. We talked about how important it was. And Peter's group is out of Minnesota, and so they have a Midwestern perspective, and they could relate to Ohio pretty clearly. And I reached out to them, and I just said, man, we need help. We need help. The Ohio Liberty Coalition is fighting, a lot of battles, legally and otherwise, and we need help. And without knowing us from Adam, they helped. They wrote checks. They came today. They offered Peter as a speaker. And so we're very excited for him to come and speak to you. I think he has a message that's going to really resound with you. And I hope you'll stop at their booth as well. Peter has a book that he has just written that is going to be signing his book out inside of the door here when you get done. If you want to get a copy of his book and buy his book, he has graciously offered to donate a portion of any of the sales that he does at the convention to the Ohio Liberty Coalition to help us with our legal bills. So we greatly appreciate that. So without any further ado, Peter Vessenes. Come on up, Peter.
I want to open this up by telling you I'm just a regular citizen like you. And in the last couple of years, watching what was happening to the country, it got me terrified. Now, when I came out of college, I actually worked in government. My wife did constitutional law for the federal government, and I was a think tank facilitator for healthcare reform in rural America. Nothing like what we're doing today. But as we started to have children, we just felt like we didn't want to live life as bureaucrats. So we kind of dropped out and joined the private sector. But I've always tracked and monitored what's going on. I know how Washington really works. 2 years ago, we really tried to help and contribute, just as citizens, like all of you did, to the 2010 elections. But coming up to this year, I got so outraged, there were 5 of us sitting around my dining room table and said, we have to do something. And so we created American Citizens for Economic Freedom, which is a super PAC dedicated to the Tea Party. We're here to help you. We don't have any big funding source. We're self-sponsored. People contribute $5 a month. It's wonderful. I'm not interested in collecting millions of dollars. We believe that what we're doing can help you not reach everyone that's here. We all know how we're going to vote. We need to reach that 40%, the undecideds, who believe the left's talking blogs, all this stuff that's pumped into their head that is emotional and they don't really understand. So what I'm going to try and share today is how this happened. And essentially, I'm going to tell you a story, which is the goose that laid the golden egg. There's one thing I'd like you to do before we start, though. I really understand that all of you here made an incredible sacrifice, not just to show up, but of your time, your effort, your energy, the groups that you're in. Would you all do me a favor? I'd like you all to stand up. And I'd like you to turn to the person next to you and thank them for the sacrifices they have made to try and save our nation. Thank you. Thank you. If I could all get you to sit down now. If we are going to save this nation, it's going to take this type of appreciation, gratitude, and sacrifice on everybody's part. Like you, I'm just a regular working guy. I own a couple of companies. The companies are focused to try and help the private sector recover because of what we're at. But, you know, today I wanted to start with, how did all of this happen? America is a unique nation. And it's a unique nation because we were founded on the principle that every single citizen has rights that are God-given. Now, despite this seeming instinctive in all of us, it wasn't normal. The very first time in the last 2,000 years that regular citizens got rights was the Magna Carta, okay? And what did the Magna Carta do? I've got a PowerPoint here because there's a lot of material and I want to make sure you can capture it because I'm not going to read all of it. But essentially, you know, it gave the church freedom from control by the monarchy. John could not control the church. There were limits to taxes. You know, so earls could only pay a certain amount and barons only paid a certain, so on down the line. It protected property of minors if they ran into an inheritance. Their parents died. The minor was protected. Widows were protected. Their property could not be seized for debts that could be paid. How does that sound like the Environmental Control Agency today, right? They couldn't seize the property. Cities and ports, people that did trade, were protected in their liberty. Freemen, you know, the working class, the craftsmen, could not be incarcerated. You couldn't be just taken into labor for an unfair wage. Common pleas, in other words, if you had something that you needed to take to court, they couldn't haul you off to London to go to court there, where you would be obviously at a disadvantage. Freemen could not be punished by a fine that was imposed arbitrarily at the discretion of the court. That doesn't sound like today, does it? Law enforcement was not allowed to take bribes or conscript stuff from freemen. If you were a felon, even if you were a felon, your land could not be held for more than a year and 1 day, and then it would be returned. No freeman could be taken or imprisoned except by lawful judgment of his peers, not of the ruling class, of his peers. This sounds pretty good, doesn't it? You couldn't use religious or charitable dealings to give you the same privileges for tax evasion. No Bernie Madoffs, okay? All members of the government at all levels were subject to these rules. That was the Magna Carta. So who made up the society then? Well, there were the king and the ruling monarchy. There was the landed gentry, the barons, the dukes, the knights. There were the merchants. And then there were the serfs. The serfs had no rights. None. They could be run over in the street. They were treated like chattel. The serfs had no rights. So then we came to the Renaissance, and literacy came into being. We had the printing press. There was a huge destruction of old beliefs about science and health and mathematics and so on. There's an incredible rise of innovation and invention. The great middle class was created, and there was a decline in serfdom. It was an amazing period in the history of the Western world. And finally, the American Revolution. Most people don't realize that the American Revolution was an economic war. Great Britain was basically finding out that our merchants, our shippers, our import-export people were beating their pants off in the open market. And George didn't like this. And so he passed some rules. If an American shipping company was to ship anywhere in the world, they must go to England, and they must ship through a British import-export company on a British ship. If you didn't do that, you were a pirate. How many of you know that John Hancock was a shipbuilder, and that his ships were boarded by British frigates, and his cargo was stolen from him, and he was regarded as a pirate? Did you know that? We call ourselves the Tea Party. The reason it's the Tea Party was we said, we don't care about what you're doing. And so the British put a tax on the tea, an excessive tax, because they weren't making any money off of us like they were off of all the other colonies. The real amazing thing about the American Revolution is that it was the rights, the inalienable, God-given rights of all mankind. You have to forgive me. I have traveled around the world a lot. I was in Venezuela when the junta took over. I went down in Zagreb before there was a revolution in Yugoslavia because we had a terrorist on the airplane. I was in Greece when the junta took over in the 60s. I've seen what the other side is. You have no idea, you veterans do, but unless you've traveled overseas to see what the oppression of common people is, you have no idea how horrid that is. So our government was formed because we had a belief in inalienable rights of mankind. 3 branches of government. It was brilliant. It was checks and balances. It was to protect the citizens. There was a regular process of elections. So reform can be relentless and without the potential crippling effects of extreme rapid change coming from a complete turnover of the government in a single election cycle, like 2008. Right? Now, let's look at this. Our Constitution was created to prevent government from taking citizens' hard-earned money and sending it out to select businesses of their choice, who in turn guarantee future votes to that politician in his position of power. In those days, it was called mercantilism. Today, it's the collusion of government with select business, with select banking, with labor unions, with teachers' unions. This is you being robbed. We are being robbed by hidden ways of taking away our innate rights. Now, let me put it plainly. The founders of the Constitution did not for a minute believe that American citizens were somehow more ethical, higher morality, more righteous than any other class of governmental power. They didn't believe that for a minute. They set up our government so the citizens, so patriots, would have a way to throw the bums out of office. That's why it was formed. The problem is that this war, this economic war, has never stopped. It has never stopped. How could you say that? How many of you know that Lincoln built the railroad systems with the Senate on mercantilism? The senators cashed in by buying the railroads. In those days, the government paid for the railroads by length. Build them long. They didn't worry about quality. It was just, you got paid. You got paid for how long you built the railroads. Boy, that's really efficient. Who were the owners? Select businesses and senators. Abraham Lincoln bought into that. It's never ended. You know, the FDR, Social Security. Why on earth did he pick 65 years old for the time to start paying Social Security benefits? Anybody know? Their life expectancy was under 62 years old. He didn't expect to pay a penny of this. It was a tax collection scheme. The Great Society. I was there, right? How many of you were around when LBJ was president? Horrid, right? Just money, money, money. Richard Nixon, bless his soul. Do you know he signed into law an automatic budgetary increase of over 8% into the federal budget that Congress had no control over? It's automatic. Every year. There's a little rule called the Rule of 72 in investing, and that says if you take the interest rate and you divide it into 72, that's the number of years it takes for the money to double. Well, let's see, 8% into 72. Every 9 years, the federal budget doubles. No control from the Congress, it just doubles. So when the Office of Budget and Management says, well, we've reduced the budget by 2%, what they meant is they limited the growth to 6%. It's smoke and mirrors. We're being cheated every day. You want to know how bad it really is? The gross domestic product is the sum of all the money we spend, right? If we have a GDP that is growing at 4 3/4 to 5.5%, we have a really healthy economy. Well, what is it growing at now? 1%, right? That's depression. That's recession. If it grows at higher than 5 3/4%, it's inflationary. That's what LBJ did. LBJ did the interstate highway system. It was an Eisenhower program. And Eisenhower said, for a state to put up $1, the federal government would put up 9. Okay, the problem was the law required that the federal government allocate budget for it every year. It never happened. When the Great Society program came in, LBJ automatically approved that 9-1. Now you're the governor of Nebraska. What do you think? You're going to spend $1 to make 9? Wyoming, Nevada. Tell me, would you do it? Of course you would. Where did he get the money? He printed it. No budgetary allocation. And so Jimmy Carter wound up paying the price for what LBJ did from this blistering amount of the increase of the money supply. You can thank LBJ and Richard Nixon. How on earth, if there's a healthy growth of 5.75%, healthy, can you cover an 8% increase in the federal budget? You wonder why we're in trouble? This is what Washington has done to us. Bill Clinton, Barney Frank, Chris Dodds, the housing debacle, they caused that. They caused that by enforcing loans that the banks had to do, or they were being threatened with discrimination practices. And the banks said, oh my God, we don't want to carry this. So they sold it. Who'd they sell it to? Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae? Liars, cheats, gypsies, thieves, all of them. That's what caused the collapse. Obama czars. The president has 14 members of his cabinet, 14 agencies. There are 34 czars under Obama. But that's not the end of it. There are 789 federal agencies. And then you add state agencies to that, and there are over 2,000 agencies that are controlling what goes on in your life. That's insanity. Too big to fail. Federal Motors. So much more. You know, what is the problem? Conservatives run to get elected. That's why conservatives run. We run for office to get elected. We want to win. Progressives and Democrats run to destroy you. Even when they lose, they go after the people who win. Lawsuits, rumors, false accusations. They make it painful for them to drive them out of office. They play to kill. And we want to win. You know, I've watched politics for so long. I made a list earlier this year of how Democrats wage war. Well, there's third-party collusion. You can shift education from teaching how to solve to teaching what to believe. Washington Incorporated, the mercantilism. Mainstream media, union leadership. Unionization of government employees. They do it with threats and violence. Protection of liberal radical fringe elements. Covert and veiled encouragement of violent mobs. Economic and personal destruction of anyone they consider dangerous. Ask your own organization whether they've come after you or not. Endless lawsuits against individuals and institutions they consider a threat. Collusion with union leadership. Filibuster and bribery in Congress to pass their own agenda. They eat their own alive if they don't agree with them. Look at Joe Lieberman. They ignore laws that are violated by groups favorable to them. They push you towards financial bankruptcy, automatic budget increases, unlimited entitlement. They weaken national defense. They funnel big money through agencies for political purposes. They want to nationalize sections of the economy. Class warfare. They incite college students to liberal progressive ideas through emotions, through lies, through talking points. Cultural destruction. They establish themselves as the ruling elite. They seduce Republicans and some conservatives with entry into the ruling class. They're in collusion with mainstream media. They're in collusion with organizations such as MoveOn.org. They have so much going on. They hide their activities and policy behaviors. That's Eric Holder, right? They bribe their own. They're outstanding in the use of social media. They're good at it, yep. They hide their activity. They fabricate agendas with conservatives. Mitt Romney is anti-woman. Ryan's budget will push old people over the cliff. Endless lawsuits. They organize and drive out the vote. They block voter ID. And ladies and gentlemen, I grew up on the south side of Chicago. They fabricate votes and voters. That's what they do. All of that is nationally coordinated. All of it. Now, how do conservatives wage war? Well, you know, we have brilliant minds and think tanks to create compelling arguments. We want to distribute that to the candidates. The national leadership evaluates swing states and builds tactics for them. State leadership uses limited funds to capture as many districts as they can. Conservative talk radio and TV. We speak to the nation, but mostly to Sunday regulars in the choir, right? There's outrage from people like us, and there's money that's poured heavily into media outreach in October. We'll have $1 billion in media outreach in October. Conservatives wage war. You know, we fight the war with sticks and knives. They fight with a 21st century armada, dangerous weapons, and covert ops. Now, let me tell you something. When this nation was formed, not every citizen was in favor of the revolution. It was not a majority. We were outmanned, outgunned, and outfunded. But it was because people like us got up and were relentless in driving what has to happen. That's how it happened. And so now we can tell the story. You know, Aesop's fables, great wisdom. It was the goose that laid the golden egg. So what was the story? You know, a man and his wife owned a very special goose. Every day, the goose would lay a golden egg, which made the couple very, very rich. Just think, said the man's wife, if we could have all the golden eggs that are inside the goose, we could be much richer, much faster. You're right, said the husband. We wouldn't have to wait. So the couple killed the goose and cut her open, only to find out she was just like every other goose. She had no golden eggs inside of her, and they had no more golden eggs. No more. So what are they doing? We are the golden goose. The private sector, regular people in this country, we are the golden goose. Progressives are taking us back to the days of the king with absolute power and privileged rulers. We have become the serfs with no rights. We're in the private sector. Yes, we are. But they're about to kill us in their demand. Now, don't get me wrong. There is always going to be a need for a public sector. We need the military. We need police. We need foreign affairs. We need the fire department. We need foreign trade negotiations. There's always a need for this in a ruling government. Always. But they're making it so large, they're about to kill us. So what's the key? How can we win? How can we take back this nation? Because the reason we're the hope of the world is because of the inherent rights that our founders said were given by God to each of us as individuals. We have to capture what were called the up for grabs, you know. Obama's team did it. They did a great job in 2008. They knew the economy was the big thing. They were fed up with Washington, and so they blamed Bush. Own the economy and maintain an emphasis on changing Washington. Well, boy, he changed it, didn't he? He sure did. Now, I believe if we're going to win, there are 5 key things that we have to focus on. This is how we're going to save the nation. The reason I wrote the book was I wrote the book to take all the complicated stuff that comes from the think tanks and get it down to being understood by regular folk like us. The first chapters are what are the golden rules. The next group of chapters are how they've been violated. Then how did we let it happen? And then there's the way out. What is the way out? We have to have energy autonomy. Our balance of trade has to shift so we control the price of energy. We're the ones that determine it. That, whether you realize it or not, there's nothing in this room, nothing you do in your life that is not affected by the cost of energy. We pay $367 billion a year out of this country every year in energy costs. Now, what happens if we spent that $367 billion inside this country? Well, the first thing is the states and the government collect tariffs on it. Oh, that's a tax. The second thing is we can reduce the cost of living. The third thing is it creates millions of jobs. And on top of that, there's something called the velocity of money. How many times the money gets respent in the nation. The way you raise the means of balancing the budget is we increase the number of times a single dollar passes through our system. When you're shipping $378 billion out overseas, how many times, even if that transferred through the country 4 times, that's $1.2 trillion that could be in this nation. We must have energy autonomy, not independence, autonomy. We have to repeal Obamacare. And I'm not going to launch onto that. We've heard about it so much over the last few days. We must. There has to be budget reform. We have to kill the automatic increases. We have to go back to 2008 levels. We have to. We have to shrink the bureaucracy. I was meeting with Babe Buchanan, who is a direct advisor to Governor Romney a few weeks ago. And I said, you do realize that the cost of regulatory law from this president has hit $1 trillion. And she said, well, no, I thought it was like $60 billion. I said, you're talking about the federal labor costs for the bureaucracy. You go talk to your banker. You talk to your business owner. It is $1 trillion a year in labor expenses to cover the cost of the bureaucracy. If there are 200 million adults in this nation, it's costing every man, woman, and child over 18 years $5,000 a year to cover the bureaucratic costs of what comes from our regulatory agencies. And you know, finally, what's the last piece? We're not in the Cold War anymore. We have a diverse set of enemies. Our enemies include people like radical Islam. My God, we've been invaded by drug lords on our nation in Arizona. And I'm not a fan of Teddy Roosevelt. He was the original progressive. But if Teddy were president, he'd have gotten on the horse and led the horses in the Rough Riders to drive them out of our nation. That's an invasion of our country. We have an economic enemy in China, and you cannot ignore that. And we have an enemy in cyber criminals. The war has changed. This is not the Cold War anymore. We have to shift where we're doing. So how can we make this happen? We have to reach these people in the middle. We have to build a war strategy that can defeat the Democratic war strategy. We've got to force them to play by our rules, not by their rules. We've got to educate everyone, not just the choir. We've got to not only make sure the people we elect follow the right policies, but over the next 3 election cycles, we have to keep meeting to keep those people accountable, or we'll throw them out as well. That's the only way you're going to make a difference in Washington. Bring out the vote. Keep the candidates accountable. Get a copy of the book. The book explains all of this in ways that you can start communicating it to others. Help us. Help us help you. Set the agenda for a real recovery, for national security, for energy independence, and a future of safety and hope for coming generations. And if you can, contribute $5 a month to us so that I can keep traveling around the nation and talking to other Tea Party groups. I want to thank you all. You've been wonderful to be with. I hope to see you outside at the book signing table.
Peter Vessenes, ladies and gentlemen.